Hello, art students, art appreciators, art historians. Welcome to this lecture with me, William Wright. Today we're going over chapter 5 of Mark Getlein's Living with Art. And this chapter is over the principles of art. So let's dig in. Last time we talked about the elements of art, and it's really important to understand the difference. We'll have a side by side here in a second. But yes, it's important that you know the difference between the elements of art and the principles of design. Chapter 4 was elements of art. Chapter 5 is principles of design. So while elements are building blocks we use to make art, the principles of design are concepts. They're bigger ideas that we use in analyzing and understanding art. So let's talk about what that is and what is design. So rather than just how the work was created, it is more about how the work is organized. Okay. The principles are broader, more organizational concepts. The way that the art is organized so that it is harmonious and shows the artist's intent is called composition. You've heard that term before, and now you see this is the definition. It's harmonious and intentional organization. It's also better known as design. So that's why we use the term principle of design. Composition and design are essentially interchangeable. So think about that. Composition may be a little more specific and design's broad, but still, same idea. There is a natural sense of design in all things, natural or man-made. And again, all art can be broken down in these terms. I guess the one difference, yeah, like I said, is anything that exists as a set of objects can be considered design oriented, or the composition of it can be considered, versus the elements again are things that we have to actually use. But still, at the end of the day, if you make art, you have definitely used the principles of design. That's the way it works. So here's the side by side. Again, yeah, we looked at the elements of art or the elements of design. Elements and principles are kind of how I usually refer to them, but whether it's talking about design or art, it's pretty interchangeable. But yeah, usually I call it elements of art, principles of design. But in any case, yeah, the elements are the ingredients or building blocks that we use separately or in combination to create imagery. And they're the typical seven: line, shape, form, and mass. Line, shape, form, and mass. Value, space, color, and then texture and pattern. And yeah, I combine them into seven. Sometimes there's eight. Sometimes there's also a 9 and 10 with time and motion. But that has to do with sculpture, and it's like a more broad, nuanced thing. So I don't talk about those. And we compare those, which we learned about in chapter 4, to the principles of design. There's typically we organize it into 5 things, although you'll see they're kind of in couples. But they are the guidelines we employ in the organization of elements to produce artistic imagery. The principles of design are not laws or rules. You can choose to violate or ignore them. They exist so that you can say I used it or I didn't use it, right? It's a more of a linguistic term, not necessarily a rule. But yeah, these guidelines achieve particular effects, and they include unity and variety, which again, it's kind of a couplet that go together. Balance is on its own, but balance and imbalance are really kind of in a way thing. But anyway, emphasis and subordination, proportion, scale, and rhythm. Yeah, and each one, like I said, they're kind of couplets. So emphasis and subordination are really one principle. But in any case, the organization, this just repeats the deal at the end. How we organize the elements and principles in two-dimensional art is often called composition, but it can be called design as well, more inclusive. Any case, number one, well, I will say too, this may only be part one. I'm going to try to get all the way through this chapter in one part, but we'll see how long the video ends up. But in any case, diving in to the principles, number one is unity and variety. Unity describes elements that are similar and provide coherence, right? They're the things that look the same, so you know they belong together in the composition. Versus variety describes the difference or changes which engage our interest. Contrast has its own definition later in the subject, but it's the same idea. Having contrast, having variety, just makes things more interesting, right? So we look here at this piece on the right, MC Escher's Sky and Water, and we see, in a specific sense, the fish and the birds, they're their own sense of variety, but the fact that some are fish and some are birds are, yeah, they're their variety. But the multiple birds, that's a sense of unity. The multiple fish, that's a sense of unity. But then the variety is the difference. And then plus just forgetting that it's a specific bird or fish, just the repeated shape, the motif of there's black shapes and white shapes, positive, negative. You can get into all of that as a sort of sense of, the white shapes do this, and then the black shapes do this, and the fact that all of them do this, all the white ones do this, that's unity. All the black ones do this, that creates a sense of variety. Right. I think you get it. Yeah. So yeah, they have to work together in a successful composition. You need both unity and variety. If we just have unity, it can be a little too static. I mean, it's just inevitable. If you've got it, there's got to be some space difference. There's got to be some size difference, positional difference. Something has to be different, and that is inevitably variety. They have to work together to make a correct composition. But like how the things, what goes together is unity. What's different is variety. Now there are two different kinds of unity and variety called visual and conceptual. We're talking about in a second. I did want to address the piece on the right, I guess, to say the unity is that they're all color wheel colors, right? They are repeated concentric circle shapes, right? And they're inside of a square, kind of those sort of things. And I guess really like no two colors that are the same or touching, right? All those things are unity. But then variety is that each square is different. Each set of circles, there's a different number of circles. They're not exactly circle, so the differences between the shapes, that's more variety, right? All those things go in to be variety or unity. Okay, so visual unity is when it's based on basically the elements, right? When you see it and there are things there, concrete things you can define, the lines, the shapes, the colors, they are, you look at them and you see that unity because it's right there. It's visual, right? It's Memory of Oceania, created after a voyage to Tahiti, basically, inspired by the ocean. So it's somewhat abstract, somewhat not objective. But in any case, we see here the large white areas create like a heaviness and a specific kind of unity. The cool color aspect of the greens and blues, that's a form of unity. But then there's also the complementary color to the blue and the orange with the orange. And so that creates a sense of variety, right? But in any case, all of it is visual, right? We know there's no ideas in it that are unifying things, just shapes and formal ideas. Maybe there's like some overlap, some spatial issues, right? Some are close to us, some are far, things like that. But oh yeah, and compare that here, more visual unity, right? We have the unity in the colors, right? That there's kind of cool colors at the bottom, warmer colors in the middle, very neutral colors at the top, right? That's unity. There's also unity in the fact that they're boats. There's a lot of boats. There's unity in the way that the marks are made. These little like dashed paint strokes, right? They're it's very painterly. We can really see what the painter was doing. But then the variety comes in when you do talk again, though, about like, even though it's all warm colors in the middle, or a lot of warm colors, there are cool colors as well, right? That variety. All the boats, while they're united and that they're boats, there's variety in that some are further away, some are taller. They have different flags. The flags kind of change. And then, of course, in the background, you have buildings, which adds variety, right? All these differences, you could say, add some sort of level of layering and variety. This boat here is much smaller, right? It's way different. But yeah, at the end of the day, you see how it's unified, the parts of it that are unified, and then you see the parts that are different. In conceptual unity, the other type of unity and variety, that's when unity is based on the idea, right? So repeating shapes and restricting colors, right? So you get more conceptual, like the cool colors means sad things, right, or something. And so there's some other person crying, right? That the unity is the idea that the cool colors are sad and the person is crying, right? That's conceptual unity. It's the idea of like the sadness, the concept of the piece. So repeating shapes and restricting colors gives the work visual unity, but conceptual unity asks for our interpretation. So we look here at these pictures. The one on the left is pretty clear because, like, while there's all this variety and that they're different photos, the unity is the idea that they're body parts, right? And the idea of a body part, while it's literally unifying in that they're body parts, even the different body parts, they're unified in the idea that they are the body, right? Okay, so it's a little bit bigger, like looser theme. The one on the left, these are all pictures of body parts. right? Again, smaller composition, but more body parts. And each body part has like a poem that sort of coincides with it, or some words, I shouldn't say poems, some writing that coincide with it. So the variety is the fact that one is a photo, one is writing. The unity is the fact that they are about uh, like the poem about the ear has things to do with hearing, right? Or and then there's things to do with touch. There's like the poems connect to the body parts, so the concept is the same, the unifying factor, even though visually they're very different, right? So it just shows you that there's layers to the whole idea of unity and variety. Yes, okay, so yeah, I forgot. Yeah, so there's like a theme to each one, and like tenderness, shame, consolation, right? Like each feeling is connected with the body part, right? And so that connection between them is the unity, right? Okay, so that gets us through unity and variety. That's number one. Number two is balance. It is not just literally balance as in sculpture, but also visual balance. So there's, literally making sure something doesn't fall over, or, making it look like it is falling over, but you bolt it down or secure it so that it's not. That's literal balance. But we're talking about compositional balance here, meaning we see and understand that the subjects in the image are composed evenly, or remember, you could say unevenly, sort of on purpose, right? To create an emphasis, or we'll talk about that later too. But in any case, in design, balance is achieved through implied weight, attention, or attraction, right? By manipulating visual elements within an artwork in order to accomplish unity, right? We unify things to make them heavier, right? We connect it. They create a mass that is visually heavier. When visual weight is equally distributed to either side of an implied center of gravity, we feel that the composition is balanced. Most people are going for compositional balance, and we'll talk about in a minute. Even when things aren't the same on either side, even when they're asymmetrical, there are things you can do visually to balance them out. So they don't have to look the same, but if you want to balance them, you can, with different concepts, which again, I'll show you in a minute. But you can also make most people, like I said, it's undesirable to seek a imbalanced piece, but you can do it. But I remember this being like the most frustrating, like big concept, talking about balance, and it still is, even for me, many, many times. And it's mostly because it's not about literal weight. It's about like your inkling, your sort of connection to the piece, intuition. That's what I was looking for. But yeah, visual weight is how heavily or lightly something is organized to draw our attention. Right. So the quicker you look at it, I guess, the heavier it is. The longer you look at it, the heavier it is. That's the idea. It's visual weight. It's not physical. So it's pretty weird because, it's a little bit up to interpretation, but not really. There are rules we can follow. And there are rules that just generally work out to create more weight. And the biggest one, of course, is large and small, light and dark, right? Those things change weight. But then faces and words there's something I don't even really talk about, but I guess we talk about complexity of object. And most people don't realize, like, if you put a face in something, man, it's the heaviest thing there. People always want to look for faces. Even when you don't put a face, people will create faces out of what the composition that's there. The other thing that people use a lot to just sort of, or when it is used, it just inevitably creates weight, is words, right? Because we start to read them. It's actually why I love artwork with words, but I typically encourage my students to be careful of it, because unless you've got a really good eye for balance, it can really throw things because it just commands our attention so much. Same with faces. You have to be kind of conscious of it. But I'll run through a list of concepts. So I'm going to take a drink of coffee. I'll run through a list of concepts that create different, ways of balancing things out, even if they're different on each side. But one of them is right here. One thing you can see, just to give an example of just pure visual things besides faces, words, is, so this is a large object that has been moved close to the center, and it is actually being balanced by the fact that the small object is further away from the center, right? So it's like a seesaw. It's like pulling out. And that's one of the things that actually does change the idea of our visual weight, right? Big things close to the middle, small things further, like it further out means heavier, right? Regardless of size. The further away it is, the heavier it is. That's one of many concepts that's a good example, but yeah. Anyway, before we get to all that, let's talk about symmetry. So symmetry is about like how similar things are on one side of an axis, or on either side of an axis. So, symmetrical balance or symmetry refers to a type of visual balance in which two halves of a composition fall on either side of a central axis and correspond to each other in size, shape, and placement. Um, it's basically when things are exactly the same visually on one side as they are on the other, right? Symmetrical balance is often used. It creates order, creates harmony. It's really unified because it's the same, just like mirror images. And it has usually it's used a lot for like spirituality, cosmic harmony, and things like that. Also worth noting is that it's not just, we're talking about bilateral symmetry when we talk about a central axis, but there's also, you can add even more of a sense of symmetry when you're working with things like mandalas or like sand paintings, anything where it's circular, because you can have radial symmetry where basically there's lots of different places you could draw a line and it would be the same on either side. So we have many of those here. We have horizontal, vertical, diagonal, both ways. Yeah, there's multiple, and that creates a sense of like I said, radial symmetry, which is even more symmetrical. And it what you will notice even with this, though, even though it's like pretty much exactly the same on either side, it's not actually exactly right. And so we do have a word for that when there's literally symmetry versus close symmetry. And a lot of people just say close symmetry, but there's also relieved or approximate symmetry. For the purpose of this, we use the term relieved. I've often used approximate symmetry, but that's when things are closely symmetrical, but they're not exactly. They're relaxed and yet fundamentally symmetrical, like these pieces here. The approach is referred to as relief symmetry. It's, I don't know, basically you can look at it and see this bull skull here. It's balanced. If you squint at it, it's pretty much going to look the same on either side. But the wrinkles on the blue in the background, they're not exactly the same. The length of the nose bone on the skull is different on the right as it is from the left. The horn is ever so slightly closer to the left side than the right. The curvature of the skull is slightly different at the top. Everything's different. Same for this picture on the right. There's this twig on the bottom that sort of goes off to the left, and it's really just balanced by the fact that the center pole is moved slightly to the right, but it's close to the same. It's close to symmetrical, but it's just not exactly right. And that's the way I do this. This darker mountain, I've even noticed it's close to the center and it's dark, so it should be very heavy compared to like this mountain here, which is lighter and like clearly further back. But since this one's so far out, it sort of balances this one here. Right? It's all about, it's close balance, but not exactly balanced. Same here. We could see, I ask you, you could pause and like ask yourself what's symmetrical here, what's not, how is it approximate, is it exact, all that. Hopefully you paused it or at least looked for a minute. I will say, you can see this large clump of trees is slightly off to the right, like it should be way heavier because there's more trees, but then there's this one is so far out and it's pretty dark and tall, so it like pulls us out. This one here, this sort of dying tree is balanced by the one that's so far out. The center dancer is slightly off to the right, so it creates a little bit off center. Even the tail of the elephants is slightly to the left. The dancer's to the right. Like all these things, they're slightly off, but at the end of the day, they're pretty much the same. The elephant's poses aren't exactly the same, but they're close, so they're relieved symmetry. It's for all intents and purposes, it is symmetrical. It's just approximate, right? Compare that to asymmetrical balance, or a composition without symmetry. And that refers to a composition in which the visual elements are different from those on the other side. They're not even close. They're not trying to be the same. But they do, you can create asymmetrical balance where it's different on both sides, but is still balanced. That's really important. They visually weigh the same, but they are very different. It's also referred to as informal balance. So here we see, even though there's way more figures and color on the right, this figure on the left is so dark, right? And dark inevitably implies weight, which we'll talk about in a second. It balances it out. Even though there's more on the right, the darkness of the one on the left, and just the creepiness of it, the emotional aspect of it, the more unified pattern just pulls our weight equally there versus on the left. I don't know. And also the faces are mostly obscured on the right, I should say. I'm sorry. And yeah, so it is balanced, but it's not the same on either side by any means. So repeating that here, asymmetrical does not mean that the work is not balanced. You can balance it out even if it's not the same on each side. And here's some concepts to help you talk about how to do that. Sorry, I'm going to check my time here. Well, I'm not going to be able to. But in any case, let me finish this real quick and then I'll check my time. So principles of visual balance, larger is heavier. Obviously, a big object is going to command our attention more than a small one. Darker objects of the same size are usually heavier. Not always, because sometimes it depends on the background, right? Contrast, again, which again, we're going to talk about. Contrast creates weight as well. But typically, if they're the same size, but one's heavier, but one's darker, it is usually heavier. Same goes for complex. If it's the same object on both sides, but you add a bunch of texture and detail to one, the one with texture and detail is going to command our attention. Pretty easy to see. So that's number 4, I guess, and I skipped ahead. Basically, 3 and 4 are the same. Texture creates complexity. And complexity makes things heavier. That's, again, if you put words on the object on one side, it's going to get heavier. Anything that adds complexity, like texture, words, whatever, heavier is textured is heavier than smoother. Complex is heavier than simple. 2 small objects can balance larger. So this is talking about how that all works, that you can put 2 little things that in the right position will balance the one on the other side. So 2 small balance 1 large. A small dark form, right? And this is really just kind of playing with the different concepts. If you make a form that's smaller but it's darker, it can balance a lighter, bigger object, right? So, and then remember the one from the slide several. This is all 1 through 5 are from the book, but number 6 I add to also say, the closer something is to the center, it has less weight. The further it is from the center, it has more weight. I think too, it might also apply to height on the page as well. Like, the higher it is, the more detail, more weight it has. But in any case, yeah, here's an example of another asymmetrical piece. I would ask you to maybe hit pause, walk through some of the ideas that I just talked about, and see if you can see like how it's being balanced, even though it's not the same on both sides. It is balanced, but how? Okay. So I typically ask, what do you see first? And most people, of course, see the bright, large, nude figure there, right? It's got a face, it's bright compared to the background, and it's large. So it commands the most attention, but it's being balanced by all these other elements. The dark figure that you can just barely see in the background, he might be heavier if he was further out, but since he's further in, he only adds a little bit of balance to the large, bright figure. The lions, again, can be, really attention grabbing. So if they were too big or further out, they might overbalance the close figure. But since they're close to the center, they really balance it. The snake's tail over here to the bottom right, I'm going to say it's a snake's tail. It's balanced by these brighter leaves here, right? This sort of peacock or whatever it is, sort of bird of paradise type thing, is balanced by the moon, right? This bright thing, both high on the page, right? And they're not the same, but they're close. And then there's the subtle rhino, which could be balanced maybe by this object, right? But at the end of the day, these objects, each one, each thing that grabs your attention on the left has some sort of balancing factor that kind of pulls you down on the right. And you're going to go to the figure on the left first, but then there's other things that are going to keep you moving around the page, interested. That's another thing, all these leaves also create breaks. So low areas of interest can actually command our attention to some extent, right? So there's less information here. That gives our eyes breaks as we move around the page, and then creates more interest when we see more interesting things. But at the end of the day, this is all composition. It's all balance. It's good times. Here's another piece, and it kind of goes off what I was just saying, that we often use balance to lead our eye around the work. Again, I'd ask you to pause and look at this piece maybe and see what you can break down in terms of what's balanced, what's not, what balances different things. I'll talk through it in a second, but yeah, think about it. And then, yeah, just the artist in doing these things with balance, especially when it's, slightly asymmetrical or relieved or whatever, it gives us things to latch onto and really break down. And so it creates fun, like in our experience of things. It communicates a work's mood or meaning. Um, right. So we see here, obviously the most commanding thing is the girl looking right at us, right? But it's in the center, right? So it's not creating any sense of left or right. It's just we're looking right at it. But then we real quickly start to look around and things pull our attention. Like obviously the figures on the right, they're so far out and they're so large, they really command our attention. But they're kind of dim. They're dark, which makes them heavy, but there's not a lot of detail. They're really simple. And that detail is, or that lack of detail is balanced by a smaller group of people on the left that have more interest. Like this girl right here, she's got the yellow glove. She's this bright pop, right? Really pulls our attention over there, even though the group of people is smaller, right? We have, of course, the bottles. The oranges are would be more heavy, I think, on the right because they're lower and pulled to the right. But then we have this this set of bottles here that's a little higher. Creates a little bit of weight as well as there's more bottles on the bottom left, as there are on the bottom right. All right, there's all these things that are balancing each other out. I also think you could say that the sorry, someone's coming in the house. But in any case, the small object or the small light, sort of close to the center. Also, it's not quite as heavy as this one here, which again helps us like balance out these large figures on the right. And plus, I don't know, I just always like to point out how once you see it, this set of feet that we don't see, the fact that we don't see it creates tension, which is a whole different compositional theory that I really only dig into in design class. But in any case, it really pulls our attention. We really are get looking there. It's heavy, and yeah, it kind of creates some pull there. But in any case, that walks us through balance. I'm actually going to use this to talk about how this can create different points of view. When we are submit to like the artist's paths for us while looking at an art piece, we can learn about different things that communicate, and balance and intention intention changes balance. But I'll talk about that in the next one. I think we're going to have to split this into two parts because it is kind of long. I want to give you a break and I need a break. You can hear the dogs in the background are starting to get a lancy. I'm going to let them out. That's part 1 of chapter 5, but I'm going to go ahead and hit pause and start a part 2 and post that later as well. So anyway, enjoy part 1. We will see you again soon.